Karen's son broke into my house at midnight. He stood there in my living room with my kid's game console in his hands, smirking like he owned the place. And when I grabbed him, he said the words that changed everything. "My mom runs the HOA. I can do whatever I want." That night ended with police lights flashing down our quiet street and a teenager in handcuffs. But it was only the beginning of a war I never asked for. It started small with the kind of sound that crawls up your spine in the dark, a floorboard groaning when nobody should have been walking on it. I slid out of bed without waking Tina. My wife checked the hallway where my son Max slept behind his door and crept down the stairs. In the living room, the glow of a cell phone lit up a figure in a hoodie rifling through my stuff like he had all the time in the world. When I grabbed him, he spun around, dropped the console, and I recognized him immediately. Kyle Carson, 14, same bus route as my kid, and the son of the most feared woman in our neighborhood. Karen Carson, president of the HOA. He wasn't scared, not even caught red-handed. He was annoyed like I was inconveniencing him. When I demanded an explanation, he sneered and dropped that line about his mom running the HOA. The entitlement in his voice was so thick it made me cold inside. I held him until Tina called the cops. They showed up quick, cuffed him, and said he'd be processed through juvenile detention. I thought justice was served. I was wrong. The very next morning, Max came downstairs pale and quiet, a smear of dirt on his cheek and a torn sleeve. At the bus stop, Kyle and his little crew had cornered him, called him a snitch, shoved him, sent him messages saying we'd pay for last night. My son tried to brush it off, but the fear in his eyes cut deeper than anything. That's when I felt it, that hopeless weight in my chest, like maybe we should have just stayed quiet. Maybe we should sell the house, move away, avoid this whole nightmare. I hated myself for thinking it, but for a moment I did. I wondered if I'd doomed my family by standing up to her kid. And then, right on cue, Karen herself showed up at my door. Clipboard in hand, navy pantsuit, sharp as a knife smile stretched tight like plastic. She didn't mention the break-in, didn't mention her son in cuffs. Instead, she flipped her pages and told me my grass was too long by 1/4 of an inch. My trash cans were visible for 3 minutes too long. And the porch light I'd installed for safety after the break-in, not on the pre-approved list. Fines totaling $700. She handed me the stack of papers like a queen issuing a decree and leaned in close. "Pay," she said, "or life gets busy around here." It wasn't about grass or garbage. It was about power. She wanted me scared. And for a second, I almost was. But when I closed the door, the fear twisted into something else. Anger. Resolve. She had just given me the shovel I'd used to dig her grave. I set up camp at the dining table, binder open, laptop glowing. Tina was right beside me, calm and methodical. We combed through the HOA covenants. No mention of 3-inch grass. The trash deadline had been updated to 8 a.m. in an addendum years ago. No such thing as a pre-approved porch light list. Every fine she handed me was either outdated or completely fabricated. We started building our case page by page. Then came the deeper rot her security company, Maple Rest Security Services, supposedly protecting the neighborhood. A little digging showed it was a shell company registered to her brother-in-law, Frank. HOA money, our dues, funneled into her own family's pockets while they strutted around pretending to be authority. And the Wilsons next door. Their garage camera had caught Kyle testing their back door before hopping the fence into my yard. This wasn't childish mischief. This was a pattern. Still, I knew she'd deny everything, twist it, smear us as troublemakers. I needed something undeniable. So I set a trap. A fake letter from a law firm slipped into my mailbox, the flap painted with a dot of invisible UV ink. A wildlife camera hidden in the bushes aimed straight at the box. That afternoon, I watched Kyle stroll by, headphones on, pretending to be casual. He opened my mailbox, pulled out the fake letter, and tucked it under his arm. 10 minutes later, he returned it thinking he was clever. Under a black light, the smear of glowing paint and his fingerprint shone back at me like neon. On the memory card video, proof of him committing federal mail tampering. That was my silver bullet. I took it all to Detective Miller at the precinct. Binder full of bogus fines, shell company records, neighbor footage, the UV trap. He flipped through it, whistled low, and said, "This kid's on a fast track to nowhere, and his mom's the one driving the bus." He gave me his personal number and a warning sooner or later Karen would escalate. When she sends her so-called security, he said, "Don't call 911. Call me. We'll be waiting." It didn't take long. 2 nights later, a white van rolled up lights off 2 men in black polos, stepping out, one of them Frank Carson himself. They pounded on my door, shouting about a mandatory nighttime inspection. I called through the closed door loud for the Ring camera to hear, "There's no such thing. You're trespassing." Frank laughed a nasty guttural sound and shoved the door hard. His hand slipped through the crack, pushing against my chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was assault. And then the sirens came swelling from faint to deafening as red and blue lights flooded the cul-de-sac. Police cars boxed in the van. Detective Miller stepped out calm as stone and played the live feed from my camera showing Frank shoving me. Frank's face drained to white as the cuffs went on. That clink of steel was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. And then came Karen, storming out in her silk robe, shrieking that she was the HOA president, that we had no right. CPS arrived minutes later, briefcase in hand, telling her they needed to ask questions about her household after her son's arrest. In front of every neighbor on their porches, she stood there humiliated, watching her family hauled away. But her fall wasn't complete until the emergency HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed, the air buzzing with anger and fear. She tried to spin it as misunderstandings urging unity, but when I took the floor with Tina beside me, the tide turned. We played the videos one by one. Kyle breaking in, bullying Max, stealing mail, Frank banging on my door. Gasps, murmurs, then outrage. Neighbors stood up telling their own stories, fines for wheelchair ramps, liens for basketball hoops. Years of abuse came pouring out. Karen banged her gavel, shouting for order, but no one was listening. The board removed her the next day, froze her accounts, and hired a forensic accountant who uncovered a web of shell companies funneling hundreds of thousands into her family. The DA pressed charges: fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny. The IRS joined in for tax evasion. Her empire of intimidation collapsed in days. That was the end of her reign. One moment she was queen of the cul-de-sac. The next, she was a disgraced criminal, stripped of power, exposed under the same laws she thought she controlled. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. I just watched as the woman who once threatened to ruin me was swallowed by her own lies. And I understood something I hadn't before. Bullies thrive on fear, but fear only works if you let it. Stand your ground, document everything, and never let intimidation write the rules of your life.